Ladies and gentlemen, hard to kill. We have a very special guest in the building with us tonight, Andrew Coville. Andrew Coville is a former U.S. Marine, and he's the author of Summer 2009 and host of the Lesson Learns podcast. How we doing, brother?
Good, man. How you doing? Thanks for having me. I
Doing
really
well.
appreciate it.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming through. So first off, let's talk about, first off, for my listeners, can you just introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us who you're with, what you did, and a little bit about the Marine Corps career for us.
Yeah, so my name's Andrew Coville. I joined the Marines right out of high school in June of 2006. Went down to Paris Island, graduated boot camp in September, went to School of Infantry in North Carolina, and then got stationed with the 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion on Camp Lejeune. After that, I went to Iraq in 2008, came back from that, and then in 2009, the Obama administration decided to do a big surge into southern Afghanistan to the Helmand province. So we did a expedited workup, and then I ended up going in May 2009 for the 7-month deployment to the Helmand province of Afghanistan to a city called Khan Neshin, which is the southernmost area of the Helmand River,
Yeah.
kind of near the Pakistani border.
Okay. You were there a year before me. Awesome. Okay, so why don't you start us off? Why don't we go right into the book, man? First off, what motivated you to do that? I mean, I know a lot of other guys are putting books out, but it's not. I know also it's not the easiest thing to relive a lot of that stuff. So, what was the motivation?
Yeah, so to really explain the reason behind the book, I kind of have to start from the beginning. And my friend Nick Aicardi and I joined the Marines out of high school together in 2006. We joined what was called the buddy program during the delayed entry program, where you go to boot camp together. We were both infantry, open contracts. And then you're supposed to go to SOI together, potentially get stationed in the fleet together, and kind of do your Marine Corps career together, which is easier said than done in hindsight, and
Oh yeah,
it's another story. But anyway,
I did
we
the same thing with my buddy with the podcast. We did the buddy program as well. It's funny we have a lot of parallels.
yeah, so we went to boot camp together, and then in the first week when you're in receiving, it got discovered that he had a bee allergy that the recruiter failed to
Oh shit.
disclose. Yeah, so I was in the squad bay. We're all confused. Everyone's a mess and brand new to Paris Island, have no idea what you're doing. One of the drill instructors comes in, yells his last name, Xiarhos, which is Greek, so everyone mispronounces it. But and then he goes, disappears, comes back later that afternoon, and he says, "Yeah, my bee allergy. They're going to put me in a med hole platoon." So our whole buddy program was kind of thrown out the window
Ugh.
right then and there. I continued on in boot camp, but I ended up getting what I thought was a pulled groin because I had this just throbbing pain in my hip
Owie.
area. Yeah. So anyway, that turned into a stress fracture in the femoral neck of one of my hips. And because I favored that one so much, it caused the other one to fracture. So I ended up fracturing both my hips unknown to me, but I made it through everything in boot
Oh,
camp
so you did all
except
the humps and did
I did.
everything? Oh,
Yeah, I did everything. I made it through the crucible, everything. The only thing I didn't do was walk across the parade deck. So my drill instructors ended up making me go to sick call, which, as you know, is like a death sentence in
yeah.
boot camp. You don't want to do that. And I knew
No.
my injury was probably serious enough where I'd get dropped too. So I really held out as long as I possibly could. But once I actually ended up going, they did X-rays. They're like, "Yeah, you have to have surgery right now." So
Oh,
I go have surgery, wake up in a hospital in South Carolina, 3 steel screws in both hips. Family comes down, finds out that whole news, whatever. They're expecting to see me graduate, instead saw
wow.
me in the hospital. But my drill instructors, they knew I had made it through. So I graduated. They came and did a ceremony in the hospital, which was, it was a special thing, but I still never got to walk across that parade deck on Paris Island. But anyway, during that, Nick continued on. He ended up graduating just a week behind, I think is what that delayed him with that bee allergy thing. He goes on to SOI. I'm healing from the hip thing for about 3 months. I end up going to SOI. We end up meeting back in the fleet. He's in 19, 1st Battalion,
Okay.
9th Marines down on Lejeune. I get to 2nd LAR. So we ended up kind of near each other anyway. We both deployed to Iraq in 2008 about the same time, but with different units in different areas of the country. come back from that. For me, it was a very uneventful deployment. By that time, Iraq was pretty much just in a policing state where we just kind of went around and we found some IEDs that just hadn't been blown up yet, and nobody was hurt or killed. It was a
So
very
you were
uneventful.
mounted or you dismounted?
For that deployment, I was actually in a quick reaction force platoon. So we were in Humvees instead of the LAVs, and I was
Okay.
dismounted probably 50% of the time. I carried a saw for the majority of the deployment. So it was a
Oh
little,
yeah.
yeah, it was a little bit of a unique situation. Um, but we come back from that deployment, salty enough to basically say, hey, we deployed and you didn't to the new guys,
Yep. Of
which, as
course.
you know,
Perfect.
is a big deal in the fleet. But then Afghanistan happens. We start getting word that they're going to deploy for LAR. It was going to be an enhanced size company of about 200 Marines. So they selected everybody that they wanted and put them in Charlie Company, and then attached a headquarters and support element to it as well.
Are they
And
telling you anything different this time around, man? Because as we both know, Afghanistan was like night and day to Iraq.
sort of, but we really didn't know much other than we were going, and we knew it was going to be a different deployment for sure. But we were just so excited to go. You didn't
Of
really care.
course.
You could have sent us anywhere at that time. And so we do an expedited workup. During the process of that workup, Nick is still in 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, but he wants to go too. So he's like, I'm not sitting this one out. He had previously made some connections with, because they ripped them out, relieved him in Iraq when he was in Ramadi. So he, long story short, ended up getting a transfer to 2-8. So he deploys to Afghanistan too. We end up meeting in Camp Leatherneck and hanging out for a bit. His tent was kind of near my company's tent, whatever. We both pushed down south for what was called Operation Kunjar at the time. And it was the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Brigade, which was about 10,000 Marine sailors, Army, and some Afghan National Army that went down to basically take back the Helmand province from the Afghanistan, who had kicked the British out of there over the last several years and were freely running their opium trade. So we all pushed down on late June. Official start of the operations, July 2nd. I'm in a city called Khan Neshin, which is way down by the fish hook of the Helmand River near the Pakistani border, sort of. Nick goes to a city called Garmsir, which was
Oh, I know
infamous at that
Gomsir.
time.
I've been there.
Yeah. Yep. So they went there. It was a very different deployment. It was combat from the moment we got
Oh
down
yeah.
there. Everything I thought a deployment would be. Sleeping on the ground. There was no fobs, no cops. It was the
You were
Wild
out there
West.
outside, living outside the wire, which
Oh
something
yeah.
you don't you I didn't even realize I would do either. I thought I would be, pushing out of a PB or a fob. I did the same thing.
Yeah, it
It's
was wild, and I loved it. I loved it until
same.
people started getting hurt. Until
Exactly.
the IEDs started popping up, and we started
Yep.
losing Marines. And on July 23rd, Nick Xiarhos, my friend who I joined the buddy program with, and all these things, got killed by an improvised explosive device in Garmsir.
I'm sorry,
Um,
brother. R.I.P.
yeah,
I know that's
so
not easy, especially someone that started from the beginning with you, man. I'm sorry.
yeah,
Did now real quick, slow down real quick because that's something that's not talked about enough. What I mean is being out there taking a significant loss. I talked about this recently on a different podcast with a kid that was in the Korengal. What it's like when like a team leader goes down or a squad leader or even a platoon sergeant. But something like this, someone that started from the beginning with you, how the fuck did you stay motivated, bro? Did you use that? Did you use that in the direction that you needed to, or was it just hard to talk to me?
well, I found out 4 days later on July 27th, because Nick was, we were about 2 hours away in different cities. So I didn't know when it happened, but we had a company satellite phone. And every so often I would call home to just check in with my mom, and who's good friends with Nick's mom too. So I'd ask, how's Nick doing? On July 27th, we're coming back from this operation. So I use the phone. I call her and she says, hey, has anyone contacted you? And I'm like, well, who would contact me? I'm out in the middle of the goddamn desert. And then she tells me Nick has been killed, whatever. I go into complete shock,
Of
disbelief.
course.
I'm saying there's no way this could have happened. He must be wounded. He's probably in Germany. We got to get more information. I refuse to believe it. Um, and yeah, in that moment, I had made a decision after. I mourned and I was very upset and it
Of
was very
course.
difficult. But I started the process of compartmentalizing it because I knew we weren't even halfway through the deployment. At that point, we'd only been down operating in Helmand for a little over 3 weeks.
Oh
So
shit. Okay. So you were
yeah,
just in that aggressive swing. Gotcha.
we were in the thick of it. It was at the height of the entire deployment when this happened. So a couple days goes by. At this point, we were set up in a cop, so we had some stability as far as like we were still sleeping on the ground, but just surrounded by a dirt berm. Really, was the only difference.
Sweet.
And one afternoon, my platoon commander comes to me, Lieutenant Mahoney, and he says, "Hey, the battalion commander wants to talk to you." And by this point, everyone knew about Nick being killed because a lot of the guys had met him too on Camp Lejeune. And I assume that's what it's about. Lieutenant Colonel Tim Grott, and he was from Boston too, so
Oh,
it's he
sweet.
has a connection there. He brings me in his tent and he looks at me, he gives me his condolences and everything like that. And he says, "Hey, how would you feel about going home for his funeral?" And I just go, "Well, how is that even possible? We're in the southernmost operating unit of the Helmand province. I don't even know how I would do that. We're not even getting mail right now. And you're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
me going home." And he goes, "Listen, we're going to go into about a week long operational stand down to refit our vehicles, recoup, get the guys some rest before we push closer to the Pakistani border. I if you want to go, it's your choice. You can go home. There'll be a helicopter here for you tomorrow morning. It's going to bring you on the whatever process you got to go do to get back to say goodbye to your friend." So, it was one of the most difficult decisions I ever made in my entire life. And, I still carry it with me to this day. I made the decision to go home because, I was a vehicle
Damn, that's a tough
commander.
decision.
I
Fuck.
didn't want to leave my Marines, but did we were going into this stand down. He's like, "Listen, I wouldn't give you this guidance to go if you were going to be missing something. We needed you." He's like, "I understand where you're coming from." And
Oh, so they
his
they they allowed
reassurance.
you to go back?
Oh yeah, yeah. So he
Oh,
tells me we're going to go in this operational stand down. If you want to go, you can go. It's your choice. I make the choice to go. Very conflicting decision. I didn't want to leave my Marines. So that started the process of me hopping on a helicopter that next morning and basically hitchhiking my way home to Cape Cod,
just so real
Massachusetts.
quick, just so if anyone in here is in the military that's listening to this right now, the reason this is so hard is if you don't realize already, is because not only is he in the beginning parts of banging it out with his guys, which is a very very instrumental part of a deployment, because you guys are just realizing you're just clicking, just starting to fight together. Maybe a couple of guys have gotten hurt. Yeah, everyone's starting to be cohesive, bring themselves closer, and to leave is the fucking last thing that you'd ever want to do. And that really shows me, how close this man was to you.
And that's very well said. I appreciate the way you explained that too, because that's 100% accurate. And it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make in my entire life. And I just,
Dude, the
something told,
anxiety must have been killing you on the way home, thinking about them the whole time. Oh, I can't even imagine that.
yeah, well, and like I said, what really reassured me was my battalion commander saying, "Hey, we're going to go into a bit of a stand down. We're not doing any operations for about the next week, maybe a little longer. So go home, do what you got to do, come right back." And that whole process was a whole story in itself. But so I make it home literally just in time, still in my desert camis with sand from Afghanistan in my hair and all over me. My father picks me up at the airport in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Pease Air Force Base.
Oh,
It's
you
like a
flew to
half,
New Hampshire. Gotcha.
yeah, it's like a half civilian, half military base. And he brings a 30 pack of Bud Heavies. I'm drinking them the whole way home, trying to like calm my nerves down. I've also
Uh,
been in Afghanistan since early May, so I hadn't had a beer. I make it to the high school where the wake's being held just in time while everyone's there. And then that started a whole series of events of, going to the funeral and all that stuff. I read a eulogy form at the
oh
funeral that I had
man,
written when I
Jesus.
was in Afghanistan. And I do all that. And then I go back. I stay home, party for a little bit,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of just try to enjoy the time I'm there, which was very difficult. The only way I could really do it was to just drink with my friends
That's dude.
to not think about it. I mean,
Yeah,
it
pushing
was
out, compartmentalize as we've been known to do, right? Yeah.
in the contrast to going from, the southernmost operating unit in the Helmand province to in my mom's kitchen. It was a lot.
I
It
talk
was a
about
lot
it from like when you get out of the Marines, you're stuck in fourth gear, and then you get out and you're back in the first, and it's like, what the fuck? It's an odd feeling.
beyond odd. And this was as odd as it could get. And so I stay home for about a week, hitchhike my way back to Afghanistan through a series of different stops, whatever, get back to my unit and continue on with the deployment. A lot more stuff ended up happening. And in the process of all of this, though, I kept a journal.
Oh, you smart. I fucking
Yeah.
wish I did that. Wow.
Yeah. So that's basically the short version of the story. Going back to your question of what caused me to write the book, well,
Gotcha. Of
as the years went on, the context of these events had different meanings at different points in my
course.
life. And what really kind of kickstarted this was the withdrawal from Afghanistan in
Oh, I'm happy you said
2021,
that. I'm happy you
and
said
and
that.
and the disaster that was, and it brought up so many emotions. I was sitting at home
Well, first
drinking.
off, let me ask you what I mean, as someone that's lost a dear friend over there, as have I, uh, someone that, banged it out over there with your boys for a little bit. So it means a little something to you because when you actually do kinetic operations over there and you leave, you kind of feel like you want to feel like you did something. You know what I mean? Or at least that you left it a better place than it was to some
For sure.
degree, you know? For me, after seeing that shit show, it's like it made me really rethink a lot of things. Um, who am I doing this for? Who is really leading this? What are we doing this for? You know what I'm saying? Like if they can just make a back alley deal with the war chiefs of the Taliban so that they can be 10 feet away from Marines and that we can't do anything. Like how do you feel about it, man?
Well, I put on a game face saying, yeah, well, what did you expect to happen? Like, whatever. I did my part when I was there, but I was deeply affected by it. And I
Of
was
course.
getting off work at the time. I was on the eve shift as a police officer, and I'd get off work, go home, pour myself a stiff bourbon, and watch documentaries about the Helmand province. Like, I became obsessed with this human experience I had gone through. And then I started looking at like parallels to the Vietnam War and the pullout of Saigon and all that. And I just thought like it's just history repeating itself at the
Yeah.
expense of these young Americans who are
Yep.
willing to go wherever their country sends them. And then
But why are we willing? What
well,
are we
it
sold?
well, I came to this realization, and this is just my opinion, that, you know, what makes this country great is the ideals that it stands for and the people that are willing to go defend those ideals. And the causes don't always necessarily matter when you get down to its most basic core, because when you're there on the ground, you're not thinking about the geopolitical
No.
aspects of it and all these things. You're just doing your job and you're happy to be there. And another part of the entire global war on terrorism that has to be remembered is that it was an all volunteer military force. There was no draft. I even talk about this in my book a little bit that, in the Vietnam War, it was so divisive and publicly divided and the opposition against it that it was a talking point. But the global war on terrorism, it was almost like the American people were apathetic to it unless they were directly involved in it. And it's not because they don't care, it just didn't affect them
Yeah.
because everyone there was there by choice, wanted to be there. If you were a family member, someone there, obviously you're deeply affected by it. But the general public, after a while, didn't even know they were going on anymore and didn't even know that Iraq and Afghanistan were two different countries.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, at its most basic essence, it's just the idea that young men and women are willing to go in the name of something they believe in and fight for something greater than themselves is what the idea that I think this country is built on. And you can't get wrapped up in the cause of it because no war ends clean. No,
True.
they at its basic essence, war is one human being killing another person.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you make sense of that? And even the ones that you look at, like the World War II generation, right? Like everyone says, oh, it was a necessary war. They've romanticized it as time goes on. But I'm sure those guys, were had some serious difficulties transitioning and
Oh
dealing with that
yeah.
stuff too. And that was a war that everyone supported.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's the same story that's been repeated as long as there's been wars. But at the core of it all, there's young men and women that are willing to go where their country sends them. And I think that's what matters.
Well, think about this, dude, because it's been bothering me lately. It seems like we're night and day from how it was when we were over there, geopolitically wise, or just the essence of everybody living right now. I mean, it seems like just the climate is so different from then, and I can't tell what it is. Is it because all these things are coming out in the open and we're starting to really see behind the curtain? You know what I mean?
I think that's a lot of it. I think
Yeah.
people they're more informed now than they've ever been. And you can't really pull the wool over the American people's eyes anymore. I'd be shocked if we were to ever get involved in a massive conflict like that again. I really would be because I don't think people would buy into it.
Yeah. I mean, how did they do the last one, man? I mean,
Well, exactly. That's kind of another thing that history
nine
repeats
eleven. I
itself.
mean, listen, I
Yeah.
never was a conspiracy theorist. I always was a red-blooded American. I watch Fox News. I have turned into the biggest skeptic. Like, and to me, if you're not a skeptic nowadays, dude, your brain isn't working. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's good to have healthy skepticism of things too.
don't get
And
me
look at
wrong, people run wild with a lot of things for sure.
yeah.
But I mean, if you want to talk skepticism, I mean, what just happened with Trump mean, man? I mean, clearly there was a power figure behind that. And we're not going to put that on that 20-year-old, you know, kid. I mean, how many videos have we seen where people are clearly pointing him out? You know what I'm saying? Like it,
Yeah,
it, it makes you think about a lot of things. And
for
I don't know
sure.
directly where you want to point that, but
Well, I mean, it goes back to what you said that it's just hard to know what's true or what to believe anymore based on repeated cycles that happen. So it's like even if you want to believe something, you just still look at it with that kind of like,
yeah,
I don't know what's going on here.
yeah.
And we could talk more about the that whole situation if you like, but going back to how I felt about withdrawal, it
Oh
it
yeah, sorry.
basically like no, it basically was the catalyst to be like, I want to get this story out for myself to control this narrative in the context it plays in my life. So I started reading that journal after all those years, and I realized there's a story I want to tell through these journal entries.
That
So I
must have been
started writing
heavy
it.
reading that thing over again, dude, the first
It
time.
sure it was, and it made me reconnect with a lot of people in the process of writing the book and all these things. And um, but it made it a cohesive story with a beginning, a middle, and an end that I could be like, okay, that was a chapter of my life. Me and my friend Nick going from high school to the Marines to deploying to Iraq, then Afghanistan, him getting killed, all these things. It just made it like something that I could be at peace with and proud of. And I mean, I was always proud of it, but not as just in this confused kind of lost state about it
Yep.
anymore. So it was like a very therapeutic, cathartic release for me.
I, I I can't imagine how emotional that must have been. Just to me, something I'm guilty of is as you said, compartmentalizing. I push a lot of that shit down and I try to distract myself. And what I realize is doing that, I push off a lot of emotions. I try not to feel them. You know what I mean?
For
And
sure.
whenever, you know, you bring them back, like something like reading your journal for a long time, they kind of just rush all in. And that's not something you can just shut off that week. You know what I mean? You still got to go to work. You still got to do all these things. Um,
Absolutely.
so why don't we talk about that real quick? I mean, how has the whole mental health sphere affected you since then? How have you I mean, you lost a really good friend, man. Let's be real. That's a huge catalyst in all these things. So how have
Yeah.
you been able to stay Andrew this whole time and not let something like that overcome you? Because
Well,
as we've seen, not to interrupt you,
no, no, no. Sorry.
a lot of our friends, mine included, more have died since we've gotten out,
Yep.
than when we were over in the sandbox. So talk to me.
Yeah. Well, over the years, that loss, and there was other Marines too that were killed in my battalion that I just wasn't as close with Nick. But that loss over the years kind of kept showing itself in different ways. And I did what you said, where I would deflect it and it would just come out in different aspects of my life. And writing that book was almost like me saying to myself, enough, like take control of this, make it mean something where
Yeah,
someone could read this who's going through a similar thing and it helps them. Because I think that, the best thing we can do is seek help ourselves so that we can help other people.
of course.
I think one of the biggest weaknesses you can have is the unwillingness to get help and say, "Oh,
Yeah,
I'm fine," when you know you're not fine, because now
yep,
you're no use to anybody. You're
yep.
just a ticking time bomb that's bringing other people down around them and all these things. So this was kind of just the only way I thought I could make peace with it. And I wrote it with no intentions beyond just putting the story out in the world in the hopes that maybe someone could read it, relate to it, and it would help them. I had really no plan on anything beyond that.
How's it been since it's been out?
It's been great, and it's caused me to reconnect with a lot of people, and it's been the catalyst for a lot of conversations that have never been had, where I've seen me and my other Marine friends open up on a level that we'd never had before. And it's been a really amazing, beautiful thing. This last week alone was the 15th anniversary of Nick's death, and a
Wow.
lot of his 2nd Battalion, 8th Marine guys came up here, and we're talking about things on a level that we never had before. Before it was just like, oh, let's get drunk and just shoot the shit, and we'll make
Yeah.
jokes about calling each other boots and shit. But it
Yeah.
was never like there's never any substance
It
to
was
it,
never
really.
structured, never. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I feel like now it's, and I'm not trying to take the credit for these guys at all. Like, they've had their own lives and their own accomplishments and all these things. But for me anyway, it's allowed that door to be open for those
Of
conversations
course.
that have been extremely productive and helpful for me.
Well, do you notice as Marines, we kind of sway away from being emotionally mature in a certain sense? As you just said, we lighten the mood with jokes, boot, this, that, maybe a homo here,
Yeah.
whatever it is. We stay away from those hard conversations because we know they fucking suck. You know what I mean? They know that maybe I will start crying like a little fucking girl. And it's I think what it is the guys before us really instilled a certain uh stoic mentality in us, and it maybe not stoic, but just be strong for your family. And what you have to deal with doesn't really fucking matter. You handle it with the sauce, and you handle it any way you can, but you stay emotionally and optically ready to handle anything. And it really kind of gets swept away. It doesn't really get enough attention, I think. It's
No.
it's it's almost championed to just not even deal with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then I went from being a Marine to a police officer. So I just traded one identity for the next, and then was so consumed by that that I never really dealt with any of it beyond
Of course.
internally. So it was kind of a culmination of all those things where it was like, all right, to me, just it's enough. And it made a huge difference in my life. And it really, you know, the proudest thing I've ever done is be United States Marine in a combat zone. That's the greatest privilege I've ever had, you
Same.
know, by far. But really, the second proudest thing I've done, I think, is release this book, because it's really the only thing I've done myself, where I created something from nothing and put it out in the world and just let the chips fall where they may. And it just was something that really changed something inside me once it was done, where I felt like, okay, well, what else am I capable of? I was able to do that and control that narrative for myself and make peace with it. So what's next in life?
Yeah.
Almost like I was just running in place for a lot of years.
Yep.
And then this is what made me not move on, but move forward
I
with
know
it.
exactly what you mean. You articulate. Sometimes it's hard to articulate this stuff because it means so much to us, and I feel the same exact way about that to me is what I did with my podcast. I was running in place with a lot of things, telling the same things over and over again, tripping about the same stuff, and I just put all that energy right into this. And the way that I think I don't know, handle my stuff, uh, is talking to like-minded individuals and maybe helping the guys after us or helping the guys that, maybe can't talk because I have tons of friends that don't even want to go that route. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's definitely helped me in that regard too. So that's good. Well, what's your opinion on this? What would you recommend for maybe guys like us that did do the damn thing, that went in a combat zone and did come back, but maybe have a lot of stuff rumbling around in the basement, that don't have a podcast, that don't have a book. What would you recommend for them?
To talk to somebody, to get therapy or counseling, whatever that means to you, or even if it's talk to a friend over the phone. But I'm a firm believer that there's nothing that helps or gives more immediate relief than talking to somebody else about something, and just lightening that load a little bit at a time.
I agree completely. Okay, so then how long after you wrote the book did you transition? How new is the podcasting for you?
Let's see, about 2 months probably.
Okay, how are you feeling?
I love it. Yeah, I really like helping other people tell their stories and kind of dissecting things on a deeper level with people. And I really believe that everyone has a story within them that they might not even know is there. And you kind of have to find the story within the story
Yeah.
and to get to the root of these things. And everyone has something to offer that's interesting. So to hear that come out of people is awesome. And like, I had my old battalion commander on my podcast.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, and we had met up to get beers and everything before that because he was up in Massachusetts, and I'd sent him a copy of the book and he loved it. And so we reconnected again. And I mean, you know how it is. That's not somebody you're just buddies with. So it was a really
Facts.
special thing. And then
Yeah.
to have him on the podcast saying, "Hey, I'm 56 years old. I wake up in Afghanistan every single day." He's like, I struggle with these things. The transition into civilian life was extremely difficult. To hear a guy like that, who you put on this pedestal
Yeah.
when you're a kid, was it just made it come full circle to me.
You know what really I had a similar experience. I had my OIC on my podcast and he took an IED blast over there as well. And just to hear his perspective of the amount of response I was fucking 19 over there, 20. He
Yeah,
was 27. And the responsibility that you have at that age, he had 60 guys over there, you know what I'm saying? In the middle of
insane,
in the most dangerous place in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like really think
insane.
about that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like being a battalion commander. You're a grown man. He was
Yeah.
41 years old, so he knew what was at stake. He didn't. I didn't. I was just excited to be there. He knew Marines were going to die. He knew this and that. Like I couldn't imagine being in that position. I
No, I
really
can't
couldn't.
either. That hanging on your shoulders all the time, you know what I mean? Like,
Well, and it's also like you were saying, you were 19. I was 21 when I was in Afghanistan, but you're so naive and just
yeah,
kind of worried about what's right in front of you. To be older and have kids and know how beautiful of a thing life is, you just know what's at stake more. You have a much
means
better
so much
understanding.
more. Yeah,
Yeah, and you know what you're missing out on or would be missing out on. So it's just
definitely.
the stakes feel much higher, I'm sure. And I couldn't imagine.
You know what I think makes a great podcast host is being able to not only understand that everyone has a story, but being able to make them comfortable to share. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because you're right. That's what I've noticed about it. Everyone has a story, but you need to get them. Really, you know what it is? They have to know that you're not just hearing them, that you're listening and that you can give a little back to what they're saying. You know what I mean? Because people all the time, like I feel like they just think they're talking and you're not really listening to them, or you're hearing them, but you're not really like it's not really sinking in. You're not really applying yourself to what they're saying, giving them a little bit back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. It's yeah, finding that angle to make people comfortable too is a really a special thing to have people open up. Like I'm having tomorrow, I'm doing an episode with retired Lieutenant General Lawrence Nicholson. He was the commander of the entire Marine Expeditionary Brigade when I was in
Wow,
Afghanistan.
that's a big
And
one,
this is a
dude.
guy. Well, and this is a guy who, right? I just typed his name in LinkedIn, told him my story, told him about the book. Within an hour, he responded with his personal cell phone number and his email and said, "Call me or text me anytime." I texted
Wow,
him. He goes, "Hey, you free for a call now?" I talked to him for 2 hours on the phone. He
wow.
said, "I will do whatever I can to support you with anything you need." I've never
Damn.
met this man in my life. Beyond in Afghanistan, where he was a general that you walk by, you get nervous about,
Yeah, no
and
kidding.
I think that speaks volumes to the Marine Corps and having that shared experience, even though it's on a
That
drastically
brotherhood.
different
Yeah,
level. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I agree with you. So where do you see yourself taking the podcast, man? What angle do you want? Is it just something for you that you want to, tell our stories and spread them around, or do you have a certain goal that you want to take with it?
I try in all of life to really detach from expectations and outcomes with things. And I think if you're doing it as a passion project or for the right reasons, it'll take on a life of its own and it'll speak to people or whatever. But as far as, and that's how I approached the book for sure. Like, again, I said I had no intentions of anything other than just like, I want to release this. If no one reads it, I don't really care, honestly. But the podcast, I'd like to just keep finding good guests
Yeah,
and telling their stories. And I don't want, it's not going to be strictly a military podcast either. I just want it to be anyone who has life lessons they can impart on other people that could help them and share just something to get through this life. And
yeah.
that's really
Especially
it.
nowadays, dude. Yeah,
Yeah. Or what they learned through their experience that they carried into the rest of their life. And So far it's been a lot of military guys because I know a lot of
Well,
military
not only
guys.
that, dude, there's so many people we respect that were in the military that were such great leaders. You want other people to see them, you know what I mean? They were such
Absolutely.
studs to us. You want them to appreciate that a little bit, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love it. I love the reconnecting with people. It's been amazing. But, I'm not trying to make it specifically that either. But if it turns into that, then great, whatever. I'm just
I
enjoying
think
it. And
exactly what you said, man. When you don't have expectations, it kind of just becomes something in front of you, and you can kind of just mold it while you're going. That's really just what happened to me, man. I had no idea how I was gonna. I originally started this whole thing like I'm not a talker at all. I've never been someone that just like expressed it. This was why it's weird that I'm on a podcast now. But I started this because I was like online and I was on YouTube. And at the time, soft white underbelly interviews were dropping. I don't know if you've ever heard of the platform, but
yeah, I
he,
have. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so he just has a really raw filter on life, and he just kind of asks people from all walks of life to tell their story. And he had said that he had a couple of veterans that were going to come on his thing, and he put out like 3 episodes with some gnarly looking vets, and they ended up just being like I think crackheads or heroin addicts in Skid Row that were like stealing someone's story and like putting out there, and it was just all jacked up. So I sent him like a message. I was like, dude, you need to like vet your guests a little bit better because these guys are making vets look terrible. And surprisingly, he sent me a message like within an hour, and he was like, "Oh," he's like, do you think you have a better story or something?" Like kind of like goading me, and I was like, "I mean, I can tell you a story," and I told him like a 10-minute story about a patrol I went on, and within 2 days, he flew me down to his studio, and I did an interview with him, and from there, it's just kind of like just taking wings, and I didn't know really because I the interview got a bunch of views and I didn't really know which way to take it. Something I think I've always had a passion for is I had some trouble when I got out of the Marines, man. PTSD. I didn't believe in mental health. I did exactly what I told you. I compartmentalized. I handled it with booze, drugs, whatever, and it kind of crept up on me really badly, which is kind of scary when you don't believe in something. You know what I mean? Because you have no idea how to control it, and you start acting different. Like my family would notice things about me that I wasn't even noticing. So I started going through the VA process, and unfortunately, I had a bad experience. And just going through just all the outlets of help for combat veterans and realizing where they're lacking. And this is not me taking a shot at them because I have had good experience as well. But I've noticed the deficient parts of like different programs there, and it's so imperative to have guys that have somewhat walked the path of being in a combat veteran's boots to understand guys that are actually dealing with the issues of combat as well, because it's a terrible feeling to just bleed your brain out to somebody and have them look at you like what, like, and they just don't understand anything you're saying, it's a feeling of thinking that you're crazy but knowing that you're not, knowing that when no one can understand just the imperative things that you need them to understand, that all your boys that you deployed with or that you've been in the Marines with could just understand like that. It's a trippy feeling, and I've definitely wanted to try to do something in that regard, and I haven't figured it out yet, but I want to try to turn this into some form of a service for combat vets, and as you said, I haven't had expectations, and I'm just trying to like mold it in that direction, and I'm hopeful to see where it ends up.
Well, I think you're already doing that right now, whether you realize it or not. You're already doing it. So what do you build upon this now? You're already there. We all have that sense of imposter syndrome in life where we're like, I want to do this or I want to do that, but you're already there. You already have a podcast. You and I are complete strangers and we're talking about this
That's
stuff right
true.
now.
That's true.
So you're
I didn't
already
even think
doing
of
it, man.
that.
You're already crushing it. Just keep building on it.
I
That's it.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears a little bit, and listen, I understand this stuff is toxic and it's shitty to even think about, but I think it's imperative that guys like us speak on what's going on in the world today. just because I believe and I trust in in Marines like myself's opinions and stuff like this. And I think it's lacking significantly in a world of today. So, I mean, I think we started off at a pivotal point in the Abbey Gate situation, which kind of lit a fuse, I think, in a lot of people. Because you're starting to see, as I said, behind the curtain, you're starting to see that there's not much difference between government and military. You know what I mean? Like I think I joined with the thought or with I don't know if it an aspiration, if you will, but I believed that there was a separation. I thought that military was military, government was government, and it was separate to a certain degree. And from what we're seeing, man, it doesn't look that way. Um, Going from Abbey Gate, I mean, I haven't seen any repercussions on any of the leadership. What what the reason I bring up Abbey Gate is because we had a situation where a Marine had PID, positive identification, on an insurgent putting IED making materials in the road. Now look at the parallel that we have to today. We have a sniper apparently that had PID uh, with a 20-year-old whatever on a roof with an AR-15, and apparently both situations were them radioing to higher, saying, "Hey, this is what I have," and getting shut down. What does that mean? You know what are we dealing with here as a whole? I mean, I know that's a ridiculously multifaceted question, and you could go multiple ways with it, but tell me how you feel.
Well, I think at the root of it, you could chalk it up to people afraid to make a decision. There's probably too many layers of bureaucracy that are preventing people from doing what they need to do. Um, but as far as
When you say
at like
afraid of making a decision, are you referring to like that putting your name on the line, afraid of getting like backlash from it, making the wrong decision type deal?
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, like whoever ran up the chain of command of like, hey, I got this thing in my sights that we should take out. The person that's supposed to be approving that hesitating is
Yeah.
kind of where I'm saying that
Yep.
that link in the chain is weakened, and that's just my speculation. I don't know a ton
No,
about
I
this,
agree.
but I think that that entire situation speaks to a bigger picture of just how divided and scary of a place our country has become politically.
Absolutely.
And I think whatever side of the fence you fall on politically, we should all be able to agree that a former president of the United States almost getting his brains blown
Yeah.
out on national TV is a real problem.
You
It's
would
not
think this
a
would form into some kind of a bipartisan issue now. Like we need to
for
come
sure,
together on this. Like
but
it's not red or blue anymore. It's like we have a serious issue.
yeah, and I think that the fact that we're so divided and we're so desensitized to violence too. This is just basically an Instagram reel now that people are already making
Yeah.
memes of, like putting Trump as 50 Cent and all these things.
Yeah.
Like it's just a big joke to everybody.
Yeah, I
You know what I mean?
know.
We have school shootings that are almost an annual thing, if not biannual at this point in this country. And those get news media attention for about 10 days, 2 weeks maybe, and people are on to the next thing. And that's the most horrific thing that could imagine that could possibly happen, is kids getting murdered in their
Right?
schools. And that's not even enough to unite this country and say, all right, enough. So now, you have a former president of the United States, or you could even say president. If this was Joe Biden, I'd be just as disturbed, no matter
Of
who it was. It
course.
could be anybody.
Of course.
Uh, Having a bullet miss their head by so little that it hit him in the ear
Yeah.
on national TV. I mean, that guy wasn't aiming for his ear. You know what I
No.
mean?
No.
And everyone
No.
wants to say, oh, the guy was a terrible shot, this or that. Well, think about this, right? If that was a silhouette target that we shoot at on the range, that would be a registered hit headshot
Oh yeah.
for
I've never
sure.
been one of those that have said that it's a bad shot. Like that's
So, like, that guy barely missed.
yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's the difference of Trump turning his head for pure
Millisecond.
grace of God, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that the bigger issue I see with it is, obviously there was some issues at the scene with either chain of command or procedurally or
We can
security
Monday morning
wise or
quarterback it to the death.
tactically,
Yeah.
all those things. But
Yeah.
that happened. And people also make the mistake of thinking that the Secret Service is the highest tier of special
Far from
operations.
yeah.
Like, these guys could have been doing that could have been their 100th rally for a different politician that year. And I don't care who you are, you're going to get complacent. You could
Yes,
equate it to standing post in country on a
absolutely.
deployment. You are going to
Same
get
thing.
you are
Talk
going to
about
get
that real quick.
complacent.
Talk about that real quick so people can understand.
Yeah, I mean, you go on a deployment, and whether you're the infantry or whoever, you're standing post on a forward operating base at some point for up to 8 to 12 hours a
Call
day.
of Duty moments don't happen all the time. You know what I'm
Yes,
saying?
exactly. And so to expect, it's easy to blame those guys at the scene. And sure, did things go wrong? I'm sure, but I don't know enough about it to be throwing stones at those guys.
Of
But I
course.
do know that human beings become complacent if you do things enough times. And I think that this is probably a good example of that. But it's also a good example of how divided this country has become, that we can't unite over, a politician, whatever party they align with, almost getting their brains blown out on national TV. I think that's a very sad thing.
That's honestly to me that is a cancer that and I don't want to be just so biased to say it's the left, but if you're just laughing at and saying I wish he didn't miss just because it's Trump, like
It
you're
just shows how
so
desensitized people are
oh
to
you're
violence,
so
and it's just
full, but that just shows you how strong the media is nowadays, dude. Like
it's
the
scary.
media has this insane, I mean, it's not, listen, it's a nasty narrative of a white Republican being misogynistic, desensitized, with homosexuals, and they're just making this crazy narrative, so there's so much hate around him, like enough hate that they'll look past a president having dementia just because of that. It's wild.
Yeah, it's just a sad thing. I mean, I remember when I saw that video on, like I get most of my news now.
Yeah, I
I
know,
just
right?
felt absolutely sick to my stomach. I
Yeah.
really did. I said, I love this country and what it stands for, and I always will. And I believe that the ideals of this country rest on the shoulders of the people that are willing to fight and die for it, and it always will. And I think we'll always have a generation of youth that are willing to do that. I think the small minority has just become the loudest, where people think our military has become weakened. But I can tell you right now, you go down to a place like Camp Lejeune, you throw a rock in any direction, you're going to find an infantry platoon that's begging to be get sent somewhere in the name of this country. And I firmly believe that. And I think that divisive politics and the media have driven a stake in us to make us think that we're enemies internally, and we're not. I think we're all working towards a common goal. And the world is a very scary place and has been for a very long time. And I just hope that we can pull out of all this. And I hope that no more senseless acts of violence happen to any politician. I don't care if it's Kamala Harris,
Yeah, doesn't matter to
Donald
me.
Trump,
Should not be
anybody. I think
happening.
it's,
Makes
I don't
us
want
look
to see
terrible.
anybody get hurt and have that hatred in them to be trying to kill
Well
another
said.
human being.
Uh, I mean, where do we, every podcast I do when I have like a good friend of mine on or a well-versed veteran with this stuff, we always identify all the little things that could change or the issues. And I always get to the point where like, what realistically can be done? And something that I've been riding on lately or hoping, is just getting the right people into politics. And I understand it's a swamp. I understand it's a difficult look. But to me, if we get strong, hopefully, I mean, I've been trying to advocate for veterans to get into politics more because I feel like we have a lot of strong leaders, and I just don't see many other ways to beat this war machine. I mean, whatever you want to call what is running our country, military industrial complex, deep state, whatever it is. But whatever it is dependent on making money. That's all that drives it, is just this massive, unquenchable thirst for just massive amounts of money. And to me, I mean, hopefully we can, start pushing veterans in the politics route, but I don't know. That's just one thing that I'm
Well,
hanging on. Is there anything that you can think of that would be
it's
a
difficult because the amount of scrutiny you're under and getting your life dissected and torn apart is not something most people want to do, and they don't have the
no,
money to do it.
that's true.
So in a lot of cases, it's just unfortunate that we're kind of stuck with what we have. But I think I still firmly believe that America is the freest country in the world. I
Of course
do.
it is.
And I firmly believe that we're not too far gone too. I think that, again, like I said earlier, that the minority has become the loudest, but I think for every one of those extremist people that's trying to undermine the freedom and democracy of this country, there's 10,000 people that are ready to fight and die for what they believe in and protect the people they love. And they just don't, they're not as loud. So you don't hear it. And the media doesn't want to focus on that and whatever. But it's also, politics has always been a bit of an ugly thing. And I have a friend, his name's Tom Bolander. He was in Vietnam in the Tet Offensive with Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. And then he went on to be a police officer for 35 years in the city of
Oh,
Quincy. And they have a Vietnam Veterans Memorial every year in Quincy because there was, I believe it was 58, I don't want to get that wrong, KIA in the Vietnam War, just in Quincy alone. And I went to one of those and he got up there and he said, "Hey, listen, I want to thank the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans here because the politicians left you guys hanging out to dry just like they did to us, but it doesn't matter. You kept us safe at home and you fought with honor." And he's like, that story's never going to change. And that, him saying that, a guy who was in the jungles of Vietnam as a 19-year-old kid, doing something I couldn't even imagine doing, it really kind of like woke something up in me of
sure.
what is important. And it just also highlights the fact that politics are just messy and ugly and they
Yeah.
have their own agendas and always will.
It sucks that it's that way. It's really, you're right. There's, I mean, not much we can do.
Well,
The drums
there
will
is
beat in
stuff
the
we
right
can do.
direction
And I
for
think,
us. What'd
yeah,
you say?
there is stuff we can do. And I think like you having a podcast and having a platform or
Starting the
just,
conversations, at least
yeah,
trying to spread awareness. Yeah.
people having an opinion that means something where they have a leg to stand on with it. They're not just talking to hear themselves talk. That resonates with people. And you have enough people thinking like that, it does make change.
That was definitely something
You know,
that I was
it's
trying to do is because media is such a, you know, terrible voice in all of this, and it just incites so much chaos and violence with diversity and racism, whatever misogynistic things, whatever you want to point at. I think that us having podcasts and talking about the right things, the things that people actually do believe in, um, is a first step. Is a first step in that, and hopefully, the conversation will get bigger, and the younger generation will continue it, and maybe this is a start in something. I hope at least.
absolutely. And I think you're seeing a beautiful thing right now where our generation of veterans are kind of getting to the point where they're saying like, all right, enough. I want to talk about this stuff and I want to voice my opinion. And one of the biggest things I realized after releasing that book and even doing the podcast or whatever, I was just amazed how many people actually care.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like people want to hear this stuff. For so long, I thought like, no one wants to hear this shit. I don't want to just be some guy who sounds like I'm beating my chest saying, look what I did. And that's, a huge vulnerability I still have with the book being out there and telling my story or my friends telling their
That's
stories.
that's that's because that's a stipulation in the Marine Corps, dude. Because who the fuck are we? Because I know
Yeah,
so many people that are legs blown off, with extensive resumes. Who the fuck am I to be doing this? And I hear you.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then it's hard to shake that feeling, but once you do at least shake a little bit of it and you realize how many people actually care, it's a powerful thing. And I came to realize that not everyone has the ability to articulate themselves or get their story out there. So it's almost like you having this podcast does that for people. They
Yeah.
see you and they're like, all right, this guy can do it, then maybe I can too.
Yeah.
He's just a Marine like me. Like,
Facts.
yeah. And then it just inspires people, whether they admit it or not. And it's just all forward momentum that will keep building and
It's
building.
all
And
good.
yeah, it's all good. It's all
Yeah.
productive and it's all has meaning and it's just a great thing.
It's all good in a dark time for sure. And whatever can help, hopefully we can all get behind. And it's tough because the veteran community is a fucking hard-headed, demographic. I, I I would love to try to unite us in at least behind something, whether it is what's going on in the world, whether it's the situation with Abigate, but I would love to see us all get behind something and make something happen together. That would be awesome to see. I'd like to see us in some place other than the comments shitting on each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, and I think that's out there. It's just some people don't know they have a voice until they find it, and then once they find it, it causes other people to find theirs, and it's just kind of it's a snowball effect.
Gotcha.
And I've seen
Well,
that like when I released my book, not to keep rambling about my book here, but
No, no,
it made me
please.
realize how many other veteran authors there were. And I was like, damn, like I can't believe how big this community is. It's a beautiful thing.
You know what I got into that was random from just doing this because I've never been like a big book guy I got into poetry. I
It's
got into
awesome.
oh, love it, love it.
Yeah.
Um, just there's a bunch of Marine poets that I've had on the podcast. Justin Thomas Egan, a few others. I have a terrible memory, but the way they can just capture the moment of maybe a dismounted patrol or walking through an opium field, waiting on EOD. You know what I'm saying? Like whatever it is, the way they can just capture a moment with just a few bars is beautiful to me.
Oh, and it's creative writing. It just has a different name, so people have this weird like, oh, that's not for me. But it's
Oh
just
yeah,
it's writing, just like any other
yeah.
writing. It's not something people should shy away from at all.
Yeah, definitely dope. Are there any other authors that maybe it motivated you to do your thing that you enjoyed reading, or was this just something just completely solo?
Oh, there's so many, dude. It's hard to name. I mean, I've read reading is one of my biggest passions in life, and it has been for a really long time. But I would say like one of the biggest things that kind of made me realize, all right, I could do this was I can't remember who the author is, but it's this book. It's called Until the Eyes Shut, and it's a memoir of a German machine gunner in 1942 on the Eastern Front who was conscripted from Austria, and he told this just amazing story in like 140 pages, and it was
Wow.
very obvious that he wrote it, and it was just there was no nonsense in it, not a single wasted sentence. It was impactful, and it was just like, holy shit, I can't believe what I just read. So I was like, if this guy could tell his story where he clearly did it himself, like why can't I? But there's countless books like that. I mean, you look at like With the Old Breed with Eugene Sledge,
Mm.
that's that book. He wrote it as though he just bared witness to what was in front of him. Like in that book, he never talks about I did this or I did that in any sort of way that glorifies anything. He was just there for it.
Huh.
And that was kind of a way that, I felt like is the best way to tell a story that
Do you
involves
think
war.
that's imperative as an author? The little details like that, the things that you see to make the people that are reading it know that, this is you. This is in fact you that was there, and the words that you're using to describe a moment, the details are so rich and so just I don't know what adjective you want to use for that, but it just shows you that it's actually them that, is writing the book.
Absolutely. I think that's the most important thing. And I think that becomes very obvious with the level of vulnerability to it.
Uh,
You know what I mean? How much are you revealing about yourself in this? Because if it's just a narrative of like, hey, I did this, I did this, I did this, and there's no like depth of your inner dialogue or like what your fears or weaknesses were, people aren't going to resonate with it. I know I won't anyway. And that's kind of what attracts me is vulnerability in writing and learning something about the human experience of things.
gotcha. Well, I think that's all I got for questions for you, but maybe one last one real quick, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
What would you recommend to maybe some young Marines that are thinking and going the direction that you went, that maybe want to write a story or maybe want to do something similar that you did with Summer 2009? What would you recommend for them, or what would be maybe some things that you could tell them to pay attention to?
Well, I would say, I mean, not everybody wants to write a book. That's just one medium to kind of get your stuff out there and have this therapeutic release. But for anyone, like I said earlier, I would recommend talking to somebody, talking to your friends, taking some forward step that's productive. And for me, that was writing. And I think anybody who wants to do something like that, just write, just sit down and start writing. Like it doesn't have to have any sort of expectation to it, and just see where it takes you. And just to, enlighten yourself, read other people's books.
Mm.
I'm a firm believer in you learn about your own experiences through the lens of other people's sometimes.
Ooh, that's hard.
You know what I mean? And you only
Yeah.
do that. You have this whole entire world of books out there and memoirs that people have been in wars and things like that, where they took the time to write these things down so that
Are you
people
saying
would,
because like you'll see similar things that they
yeah,
did? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you'll see how someone handled a situation that you're like, my God, I never even thought of that. Like, why haven't I done that the whole time? And it's just like you have these stories out there that are just waiting to be read. And it's
To
just,
help you. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. and it just enlightens you to how other people deal with the same human experience you might go through.
Well said. I like that. Okay, Andrew. Well, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you at, where they can get your book? Any links you got?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon. Summer 2009, A Journey of Self-Discovery Amidst the Afghanistan War. It's there's an audiobook too that's available on all platforms. My Instagram is AW Coville. Facebook is just my name, Andrew Coville. And then I have andrewcoville.com, which has all this stuff on it. It's got
Okay,
links
cool.
to my podcast, the book, and a bunch of other stuff. So that's really it.
All right. Well, I'll make sure to put those links under the thing that I post for you, so they can find it pretty easily. But yeah, hey man, I appreciate you coming by. This was great. Let's stay in touch and try to do another one soon. And I hope the best for the book.
Absolutely, man. It's a real pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on here. And
Absolutely.
again, you're doing a great thing with this, and you're a very good interviewer, and you're really doing big things. So don't sell yourself short.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Seriously.
Yeah.